Hello, welcome to Interaction Design Modeling and Materials Module 2 Tutorial 3. Today we're going to be looking at laser cut maps. One of the options for your Project 2 final design is a laser cut map. Laser cut maps are a powerful, effective, and aesthetic way to view and explore map and spatial data. Let's Google laser cut map to see the incredible variety of possibilities. This is an opportunity to work with one of the amazing digital fabrication tools available to us being on campus. Here we can see, by Googling laser cut maps, tons of options available. All of them use beauty, aesthetics. You can see that some of them use color to designate water or other features. Many of them are layered with multiple different types of data, street data, water data, land data. All of this spatial data being used specifically to create this visual, pleasing, and informative type of laser cutting informed entirely from spatial data. Laser cut maps are often made of thin sheets of wood, allowing for multiple layers of a fairly strong material to create a sense of depth while remaining relatively thin and light. Laser cut maps can include different types of data, including road networks, water systems, and topography. We will use Mapbox as a tool to create precise spatial data-based images that can then be turned into vector paths. Laser cut maps use detail, digital fabrication, and material language to add beauty to this location spatial data. Digital fabricated maps can be as detailed or as simple as your design and location permits. Time and detail are cost factors when creating these published objects. Let's look at some material considerations. Paper, cardboard, or foam boards are a good and inexpensive material to use for simple laser cutting. While not capable of etching, they can be fully cut in a fraction of the time and cost of wood. By the end of this tutorial, you'll be ready to print your first laser cutting map-based project. You can see how paper can create beautiful and incredibly thin, precise cuttings of spatial data. Cardboard is a great material if you want something a little sturdier than paper, but not quite as thick and expensive as wood. Foam core is a strong and lightweight foam board material. It offers some durability and structure while reducing weight and time to cut. Printed images can also be adhered to its paper surfaces very easily. This is a great choice if you want to test something more durable than paper without the cost of wood. It's a thicker material, but the paper surface allows you to then add artwork directly to it. Wood is a popular material for laser cutting due to its increased durability and refined finishing options. You may decide to paint or stain some elements, like making the water blue. As a laser cut material, wood offers the most durability, detail, and beauty, but has the increased cost of time and materials. It should also be mentioned that your one card has a certain amount of funds available specifically for laser cutting. Some materials express certain data better than others, but all have the potential to use the language of physical precision and aesthetics. Mapbox has many different types of data available, isolated just by separating layers in different maps. This location data just needs to be exported as an image file. The rest of the work is done in Adobe Illustrator. This project will help build your 2D vector editing skills in Adobe Illustrator. Once you know the requirements of the Fab Lab, you can decide on the tools required to create suitable artwork. Because this is a multi-stage process, you need to be thinking through this step by step. Adobe Illustrator is the required file type for the laser cutting software we use at Sheridan. Let's look online at some examples of laser cutting so that you can understand a little more of the process of making these decisions. Here we have a close-up of a laser cutter, and you'll see that it's an industrial machine that actually has a high intense laser beam, and this is cutting through solid plate steel. And as you can see, it cuts through it like butter. So this machine is an industrial machine, and it follows an XY axis, very similar to when we were discussing how a 3D printer works, just without the Z axis. So in an XY axis, it's just like any other printer. This one uses a laser as the head instead of a printer. So this means that it's capable of using the laser to do lots of different things. So these are the three main ways that a laser cutter is used. We use it to cut directly through a material. We use it to etch a material to add some depth to it. And if you were to touch this, you'd be able to feel it with your fingers that it actually penetrates the wood by a millimeter or two. Or we score it and we just do surface detail. So if you were to touch this, you would feel nothing, but it's like drawing directly onto the surface. Not all of these work in everything. For instance, you can't etch paper, right? You can't etch foam. The foam will burn. You can cut through them, and on paper, you may be able to score, but it will most likely burn as well. So wood allows you to do the most options, but it's also the most expensive. You'll also notice that when you cut right through text, for instance, you lose certain details that can't just float in midair. You'd have to go in and alter so that you had areas of wood connecting if you want to keep your fonts fully connected. This would work the same way if we were building roads, for instance. So with our road data, if we were to use the road data and start cutting it out, it would basically cut out everything and leave nothing. We would actually need to either etch or score road data, or we would need to make sure that our roads are all one perfect piece of cutout and it's one length. That might be a little confusing right now. Certainly once we work in the advanced version of this tutorial, I would walk you step by step through that process. In the meantime, we're going to choose something a little simpler. Now, the other option, of course, is that this process of etching and scoring is sometimes also called laser engraving. And laser engraving actually has a tremendous amount of opportunities for detail. So sometimes, yes, you cut through with wood, but other times you can actually create an etching from vector art. And as long as the art has been converted to lines, you can get some incredibly beautiful and detailed image work put on. Our tutorial is not going to be covering this process because it is more advanced. However, we will be able to do things like basic blocking out text and let's see, what else do we have here? Cutting out sort of large surfaces or black and white images. This kind of logo work is exactly what we're going to be doing in this tutorial. Now that you've got a bit of a sense of what this looks like, and how these processes may work, let's now jump into Mapbox so that we can see how do we select the map spatial data that we can actually use for laser cutting. So here in Mapbox, I'm going to scroll down so you have my styles, and what you'll find is that I have a series of different styles already prepared. Some are tutorial, things that we're going to look at today. Some are specifically created for laser cutting, and we're going to focus on those. But as we scroll down, you can see that there's lots of different maps here. Some of them are fully published for you guys to use. Some of them are for other tutorials. Before we jump in and I show you how to use the outlines for laser cutting, let's take a look at this map. So with this map, you can see that I have styled it in a very specific way. This is actually of Oakville, and our Oakville Trafalgar campus is around here. Our downtown Oakville is around here, and in fact, one of the locations that I'm going to be focusing on is this specific location for some of the data, the spatial data that we'll be discussing after I show you the mapping data. But you can see that I've turned off all the place labels, and specifically, I have gone in and adjusted all of the data so that it shows up as black and white. So if I scroll in far enough, we can get buildings popping up. The buildings are not going to pop up as we're further out. I do have mine set in a specific way for my style template for building paths, but in fact, there's too much information once we scroll out. So we can only get to a certain level before Mapbox will pop that data out. And that's unfortunate because it'd be great to be able to have that data at, say, this level. But you can imagine it would be so small, it'd be very, very difficult to see. So you really have to decide on how you want to use the data, okay? How you want to use this to create an image. And you need to be thinking about it both as an image and then understanding how that works as a vector. Because we can't just go in and take this and think we're going to get a good cutout. We could etch this, but if we were to cut this out, we would have lots of problems. So let's jump into the style that I have prepped for us, which is the water outlines for laser cutting. And this is a great style to use as a first simple style for a first simple laser cutting. So if I scroll out a bit, you can see that what I have here is actually the Great Lakes. And in fact, Oakville and Toronto are in this area of Lake Ontario. And you can see that there are still hundreds of other water bodies, not just the Great Lakes themselves. So how do we get this as an image, export it into something that we can actually use? So in Mapbox, up in the top menu, there are a series of different options. And for our purposes, we're going to go to the print panel. You'll see that in fact there is a width and height. We're defining the size of the image we're going to print. So I have this set to 11 inches by 8 inches. I have the resolution set to 300. I have it set to PNG format. And you can see that I have right now 97 monthly exports remaining. You get 100 exports per month. You won't come close to using that for this module. And as I scroll down, you can see that this is actually the full amount of data from this map. So what you see on the screen does not actually show the full size of the image that's going to be printed. Use this image with while you're scrolling here to help decide. So I'm going to start scrolling in. Because we only want the Great Lakes themselves. That's probably as close as it's going to get. So now that I have that, I've been able to reduce it to kind of what we were looking at on the screen before. So once we have that, it's possible to go to print. It gives us one last preview. And obviously you've already selected, so don't use this again as your way of deciding. Print. And it's going to print that copy out into your downloads folder. And from your downloads folder, you can then take this into Adobe Illustrator, which is where we're going to head to next. Okay, so here we are in Adobe Illustrator, and the first thing that we want to do when we're working on some kind of laser cutting is we need to decide on the artboard that we're going to use. In Adobe Illustrator, that's sort of the size of your work surface. And what's important with laser cutting is that it's better to use an artboard size that is the same as the actual material that you're going to cut. And in our case, we're going to be cutting the wood that's available in the bookstore. And we're going to be working on one of the smallest sizes for now. Go to New File. And I have it set up already to this 16 by 11 inch. I have it set to landscape mode, and I have it set to color mode as RGB color, and it needs to be RGB color, okay? And we're going to create. So the file you guys are going to get is going to be this exact size, and it's going to already have a template on it, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. But if you were starting from scratch, that would be one of the things that you would need to do, is set it up on the size of the wood that you're going to be cutting. Now, if you're doing sort of just like editing images and prepping them, you can do those off on other sizes, on other artboards, and then copy those images, or sorry, copy those vector paths and bring them over, and we will in fact do that. But the board you're going to be working on is going to be the size of the wood that you're going to be cutting on. So let me pull up a file here. Here you can see that I have a laser cut file prepped. We're going to talk a little bit about it. First of all, this is the wrong size, right? So I have this set to 8.5 by 11, which is a normal piece of paper size. And I have two different pieces that are ready to go, and these templates are actually cell phone stands, and they fit together, and I'm going to show you an image of what that looks like as well, or a short video showing you that. But this is just to show you what sort of finished artwork looks like, but we don't want it here. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to select all of this, and I'm going to copy it, and we're going to take it over to this new artboard that we're using, which will also kind of show you the general size difference, right? So I'm going to just place that there, and then I'm going to move this one over a bit, and then I'm going to copy these, and I'm going to paste them, and I'm going to move them over here. And this is actually the file that we're going to provide you guys with. Certainly you'll have some of this artwork so that you can emulate it properly, but you'll be able to put your own images in here, and that's the idea, is showing you how did I get these images in here, and how did I then get this to print properly? Because laser cutting, just like 3D printing, needs to have proper files set up. And in fact, one of the big differences is that in 3D printing, we have Cura, which works as sort of like this interpreter of our STL files, and it does all the vector path stuff and tells the printer, and we don't have to really do anything more with it. We just look at the visual. We don't have that with laser cutting. We build our files in Adobe Illustrator. We bring the actual Adobe Illustrator file. That's what we submit, or we use when we come to our laser cutting appointment. And so that means that you're going to end up in a place where you might not find out their problems until you're actually in the room. So each of these is a template mobile phone stand. And then inside of these, I have put some artwork. Some of it's text, and some of it is, you can see this is actually mapping data, spatial data from Mapbox. This one I've done a sort of like a standard like Sheridan with the IXDA logo with IXD on it. And all of these are prepared. So this is not just a bitmap. So we need to talk a tiny bit about images. When we get our PNG image from Mapbox, it's a flat bitmap rasterized image. It means that it has no vectors, and we very specifically need to use vectors for this. So we need to convert the artwork, including even when we have text. So if I click on this, you can see that in fact, and we'll go to select, you can see that there's actually full vector paths here, right? So those vector paths are the reason why the laser cutter can cut around this, or in this case, sorry, etch this. And the etching of this is what matters, because if this was cut out, it would actually cut the outside of the line, and all of any font that has an inside path like the D or the A or the E, those would all just disappear. They would fall out like a puzzle piece that doesn't attach to anything. So, and I will actually show you what that looks like, because I did actually get that cut as well, so that you guys can see if that's a mistake. So what we're going to be focusing on is not cutting the artwork. We're just going to cut the actual sort of path of the template, and it's already set up to do that. So you don't even need to do that. But what we do need to do is make sure that we know how to prepare the rest of our artwork so it does. So one of the things I'm going to do here is also show you what the Sheridan template file looks like. So I'm going to pull that up. And this is a file that you can download if you look up Mac Tech Fab Lab, and then you make your way to, I think it's in the laser cutting file section, or prepping laser cutting. You'll find that there's a link to this Adobe Illustrator file. And what it does is it gives you all the information, right? Like this is sort of the maximum artboard size that you can get for the laser cutter we have. It also it tells you to convert all your text to outlines. It tells you to make sure you're using RGB, not CMYK, which means your RGB red would be 255.00, and it needs to be set like that. The stroke needs to be at 0.01, and if it's a fill, which is what you guys are going to be working on for this tutorial, it's just straight black, and there's actually no outlines. So these are the sort of three ways that should look. I have made sure that the actual correct color swatches are here. And so there's a raster black, a cut red, and a score blue. The red is set for cut. The blue is set for score, which we're not really doing. And the black is set for engrave. And so the artwork that we have is actually set up this exact way. But this file has the proper color swatches, and they're set to RGB, and that's also what matters. So we can go back to the other file we have. And so we have, in each of these, we have some text and we have our artwork. And that's really the focus of what you guys are going to do. You're going to either use the text that's provided and change the artwork. It could be that you specifically do the Mapbox part of the project, which is going to be taking the PNG, bring it into Illustrator, and how do you turn that into a vector path? And this would be the outcome of that Great Lakes one that I showed you. So I'm going to go to New, and I'm going to start by dragging in the image file. So I'm going to just zoom out. You can see that it's a large file, which is good because there's lots of information there to start with. And in order for us to resize it, make sure you're in the selection tool. I'm going to hold down Shift to keep the aspect ratio properly so it doesn't squash and stretch. And I'm going to put it on there. And now I've got all of my artwork on my artboard, and I can progress. So I'm going to select the artboard. I'm going to go to Window. I'm going to go to Image Trace. And I'm going to just drag this out a tiny bit. In Image Trace, this is important. You want to set it to black and white logo. We want tracing result. We want the mode to black and white. The threshold can stay at 128 right now. That's not really going to affect anything, but we're going to bring advanced. And when we bring advanced, you can see that we have paths. We actually want to push paths all the way to the top, and sometimes it'll work again there. We're going to push corners to the top. There we go. We're going to push noise to the bottom. We're going to simplify. Okay. We want to ignore color, and it's going to ignore white, and this is important. And then we would just get black and white shapes for now. Yeah. Okay. Let's try it both ways. I'm going to do this first, and it won't do anything at first. What you need to do is click expand, and then it does the work, and you can actually see automatically that there are now lines on everything, right? Like it's a huge bunch of vectors, and what we can do now is we can go in and we can remove, and we want to actually spend some time and go in and remove everything we don't need. And you got to be careful because some things are attached, right? So you don't want to remove things that are attached to things that matter to you. But what you also want to keep in mind is that these are now vector paths, and so it is possible to kind of grab them, and they will be their own individual objects. And we're going to clean all this up, and I will probably just speed up this process a little bit so you guys don't have to watch all of it. So once you get it down to this level, you can start to zoom in and look for areas that might be even closer that you want to remove. Now, you don't have to remove artwork in detail at this stage because we're etching and we're not cutting these out, so we don't need to be worried about that they're going to do, some kind of weird interconnection. And certainly if we were cutting this out, we would have to remove all of these islands and everything, because everything I remove here is another lake, basically, right? And so I'm moving them because it can be a bit of a visual distraction, and I'm trying to not just remove everything. I'm just looking for the pieces that are going to be outliers. And there's another way we're going to do that as well. But first, I'm just going to work my way around looking for any outliers this way. And it's up to you. Like if you don't want to have the little, the little islands sort of there, you can remove them, right? You could keep some. You could get rid of the tiniest ones so that they're not as much of a distraction. They are certainly really small. Like you're not really going to see them very easily because the actual artwork is going to be really tiny by the time it's fully done. This piece here is a bit problematic, and let's see if it will. So the only way I can get rid of that would be I'd have to really go in and start removing the individual. Oh, can I get rid of a few of them? No, not without chopping a whole bunch of stuff. And I don't want to get into that part right now. The one I'm going to show you will have that level of detail, but this one in particular does not. Okay, so what we'll do next is we're going to look at how to make sure that this is ready. And the first thing we can do is if we look over in our layers, you can see that there's a lot of layers here. And if we go in, and this is a great way to be able to figure out what can we eliminate, right? And it's not until, there we go, we get into these big ones at the bottom. So in fact, I'm going to remove all of these. There we go. So once I made them visible again, I could select the whole row, and I just deleted them, and you can see that now I'm left with just a couple of nice clean pieces of artwork, right? And that's all of them, and just make sure that, no, you know what? We're going to get rid of that one too. And we definitely want to keep that, keep that, keep that, keep that. Oh, wait a minute. And that's the whole path. Yep, perfect. So now we have everything that we would need, and we can check our stroke. Like, we want to come up here. Now in this one, I don't have the right one set, so I'm going to go to add a user-defined library, which for me is I actually made the Sheridan template pieces part of a user-defined library, and so I can now go and add them to swatches. I can close that, and now I can make sure that everything that I select here is going to be in that black and have no stroke. All right. The other thing we can do, just as a quick cleanup, now that we're done with the image trace, is I'm just going to pull up Window and pull up Pathfinder. And with Pathfinder, we can just check and see, is it possible for us to merge anything? And it did. We were able to merge some stuff there, and then I'm going to look into Unite. There we go. And so now we've actually got everything really clean, and it's going to be, down to some really basic stuff. Now let's try to keep those little elements that are there, because at this stage it should be a pretty clean graphic. And now I can grab that, I'm going to copy it, and let's head over here. And how about, let's replace this one. So I'm going to actually just delete that. I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm going to bring in that big one, right? And we're going to want to choose our select. Shift. If you don't hold shift, it's not going to scale uniformly. All right, and this time I'm just going to move it this way. And it's still too big, so I'm going to hold down shift, and I'm going to scale. And I want to scale it up a little bit. It looks a little small. Center it, and you can see that now what we have there is, slightly different, only in the way that it worked some of the really core components, but overall really close. I did a little more editing here, and that was about it. And that was essentially the same process that I used to get this vector artwork of the IXDA logo. So you can see that it's a full vector, and we can scroll right down, and also you can see moves around easily. The text is a little bit different, so let's go back over maybe to this file, and we'll just look at how we can do something with some text. So I'm just going to, all right, so you can see it created like a big chunk of text there. Let's make that 60. That's better. And then I'm just gonna get that down. Great. So again, this is text, and it isn't outlined. And so what we're going to want to do is we go to type, and do we want smart case? No. We just want create outlines, and it will immediately do that, and it'll create outlines. We have to go then to our direct selection tool, and you can see that it has. Now, sometimes that'll work just the way it is. You don't need to do anything else. And other times, so let me just kind of close this one up, and you can see that we have a new set of layers, and each one is on its own, and it's not saying whether it's a path or compound path. It looks pretty good in general, and for what we're doing, we could then just copy that over, paste it, but of course you will be provided with this one, and then you'll be able to go in and just make some changes. So those are the two different ways that you can add elements to, and they work the same way, where you're just doing the outline, image trace tool. And the other ways, you could draw it with, just draw it straight with the pen tool if you wanted to. What we're not going to do this time is we're not going to cut out the artwork, and I will show you, once I show you some images of this as a final project, what the cutout does look like. In the advanced tutorial, like if you decide you want to do more laser cutting, you could go in and do that, but we're not going to cover it here so that we can move quicker. You can get in and do your first laser cut as quick as possible. So let's say then 4 students could even do this, right? You could have 4 different people submit or work together, get their files all together, and then this could be a file that is taken over to the Fab Lab or submitted to the Fab Lab, and you could laser cut it, and 4 of you could be done in a very short amount of time that way. So I'm going to save this. I'm just going to show you a slightly different version of a project. Let's take, and we're going to bring that over. There it is. All right, I'm going to move it over. And right now this is set up as a laser cut, like to a cut line, but let's change that. So I'm going to change it to a fill, and we're going to remove that. And so now we have, yeah, and it should be set to RGB. So there we go. Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to include that so that you can see. So this moose artwork, I will give you a quick little background on why I added this. In fact, it has to do with that it's a really specific location in Oakville, and I'm going to include that story here, and then we're going to finish up. Here's a Google Maps view of Oakville, and you can see that there's Oakville Place, there's the Sheridan College Trafalgar campus, and then down here we have this place called Tannery Park and Lakeside Park. Certainly for a lot of the work we're going to be doing with spatial data, we're going to be selecting locations, especially when we do, for instance, augmented reality. We need to have a location. So I have a history in Oakville of some specific artwork that I've created. This is Ercles, which is part of the Historical Society, and I have a monumental sculpture here. So I made this moose about 10 years ago, and another artist named Bert Jackson, he made these wolves. And this is sort of like looking at it in the middle of summer. Probably looks like that, pretty close to when we are. Maybe it's getting a little cooler now, so might not be quite as green as this. So I want to show you this because this is a specific location that I have a connection to, and I have interest in expanding this idea. Here's an image of this location, nice and flat. So you can see that the actual sculptures themselves are fairly flat and easy to work with. If I wanted to use this to actually create a cutout logo, now, yes, it would be possible to try to go in and get this etched and create it as a full photographic artwork, but this is not that good a photograph to do this to, and I wouldn't do that. But if I wanted to have the outline of this moose and the outline of these wolves to do something with them for this kind of project, this can become spatial data. So if you have photographs of a location and you want to work with photographs of the location instead of working with the mapping data, that is also a possibility. This is location data. So if I then close that, I'm going to show you a finished project and a small connection of how it was made. So coming back into Illustrator, I'm going to open up another file. So here we see the same template, but we see some different kind of artwork. So this is using that exact image of the moose, and this is using that exact, in fact, this is a duplicate. This is just a larger one if I wanted to cut that out, for instance. In this one, this could all be etched, and therefore I'd be able to have the images of the moose and wolves, which is a monumental sculpture, and it's specifically spatial data. This is based on the location. So if you have a location that you want to do some work around, this is a great way to explore it. So there's lots of different ways to approach this project as long as you're using the templates. So here we are looking at a couple of the laser cut pieces that we were just looking at. You can see that we have the IXD logo and we have the IXD text, and this is etching. And etching has left like a nice little, there's a ridge here and it's left some depth, and it's really great. And I can show you what these end up looking like, where you take the other piece of this and it slides in and then through, and then what you end up with are these nice little cell phone stands. Okay, and each one of the template pieces has exactly the same set, so it's always a set of 2, and should slide in. There we go. So there we go. So out of it, you can, if you print a Sheridan IXD one, you get your own little cell phone stand holder. So now that you've kind of seen the way they function, let's look at the artwork a bit. So we've got, those are the etched ones. I'm going to show you the moose as a cutout piece. where I've left the text as a etch, and then this is the cutout of the moose. And it is possible to do this, but this is getting a little more advanced, and I don't mean because it's not easy to just make it red or make the stroke red and 0.001. It is easy to do that. It's that the vector path has to be perfect. And I'll give you the example. This is the first version of that one. So you can actually see that even though in Adobe Illustrator it was actually perfect, it looked like this, when it actually went to cut, it was missing a whole bunch of pieces. And what I ended up having to do was go back and rebuild those pieces. Because of the way that I had used image trace, there's another step that I would have to do that we're going to cover in the advanced tutorial. So when you want to cut out images or objects that way, it's not difficult, but you do need to go through that process. So for instance, this is the Great Lakes version, where even you can see that the typeface, well, those will pop out. Actually, I just haven't popped them out. But you can see that the map itself is almost non-existent because it was done in so many compound paths that it didn't work properly here. And therefore, what that needs to be done is, and I have already fixed that up, and maybe you guys will actually see that by the time you're watching this video. You can also see the problem with the typeface, where anything that is sort of interior, any of those extra paths, they just pop away. There's nothing holding them in place. So there are some typefaces you can use if you did want to cut through, and again, we're going to talk about those in the advanced video. So for what we're going to be doing today, it really is just sort of versions of this, right? So taking your Mapbox spatial data, or taking some kind of a logo type image that represents a location, because we will eventually be doing this within making more of like a laser cut map in the advanced version. In the meantime, this is a great way for you guys to get your first experience with laser cutting. So what are our takeaways? We've looked at laser cutting, a digital fabrication tool regularly used by designers and makers. Design practices can include many fabrication technologies, and while we don't need to be experts in all of them, we are empowered through being more informed. We need to recognize best practices in file preparation for these technologies to expand our design vocabulary. If you choose to create a laser cut map for your final design, then the video Module 2 Tutorial 6 Advanced Laser Cut Map will guide you through the process.